again, everyone, and welcome to our Lexham author interview series. My name is Scott Corbin, and I serve on the marketing team at Lexham Press. I am delighted today to be joined by Rafael Bello, author and friend of mine. He has recently published Sinless Flesh, a critique of Karl Barth's Fallen Christ from our Studies in Historical and Systematic Theology series. Rafael is professor of theology and interpretation at Martin Luther Seminary in Brazil, and he's also an editor for Fiel Publishing House. Rafael, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I have a little bit of background on you since we're also personal friends as well as colleagues now through Lexham. But for our viewers, I would love for you to provide a little bit of background on yourself and how you came to your research topic.
Again, thanks for having me. It's a joy to be here, and it's a joy to be talking with you. So on personal background, I'm originally from Brazil. Grew up here in Brasilia, actually, the capital of the country. And then I went to do a master's and a PhD in the States. And I'm, now that I finished the PhD last year, I'm back. The people at Martin Luther and Fiel Publishing House were generous enough to offer me a job, and I'm here and enjoying the time that I'm having with them, even though it's in the middle of a pandemic. But in terms of also family, I'm married to Josie. We have 3 kids, Clara, Natalia, and Thomas. They're all under 4. So we have a lot of work on our hands right now. And for my personal research interests, the topic came because I started doing a PhD, and I knew immediately that I was drawn into more discussions on Trinity, Christology, things that are related more to kind of metaphysical implications of those 2 doctrines into other issues. And initially, actually, I wanted to do a dissertation on the extra Calvinisticum, which is kind of a doctrine of the Son's not being contained or circumscribed by his human nature. And I kind of tried to go about that topic, and just couldn't find a good angle. And it was kind of by my advisor's suggestion that I just look into some other contentious topics in Christology, that I came into the fallen and unfallen debate. I knew that some people were talking about it, but there hasn't been kind of a large monograph, especially engaging with Karl Barth, who seems to be kind of a large figure in that. There are several monographs and dissertations engaging with Torrance, but just not a lot, or I couldn't find one that was specifically devoted to Barth. And that just piqued my interest, and I just went through it.
That's great. And so you mentioned the kind of fallen human nature debate. And so that's obviously something that's kind of an issue in contemporary systematic theology. So there might be people who don't know a whole lot about what the entailments of that debate are. So could you kind of just explain what is that debate and kind of why it matters for Christian theology?
Yeah, I see. Every time I talk about this, I have to start with a caveat that the people holding to the fallen human nature, at least the ones surveyed on my book, are not they're not saying Jesus sinned, and they are not saying he is a sinner in some sense. So even the people who disagree, or the people on the fallen side of this debate, are I would say they're still within the bounds of Orthodox Christianity. So the major debate is just basically what can you say about that human nature that Christ assumed, right? So it is a created human nature. It is not a human nature that came from heaven. He didn't receive that, just like kind of our, since some Anabaptists would say in the past, but it is a created human nature. And he received that human nature from Mary. So does it still have the principles of sin, but not guilt? Or can you say that he doesn't have either sin or guilt? So a lot of the debate hinges on that, right? So having been fallen, the fallen guys, the fallen people the people who hold to the fallen view would still say it's fallen, but it doesn't have guilt, because guilt is more related to you being, you have to be liable for that sort of punishment for something, which Jesus doesn't have. So that's kind of where the debate stands. Now, my dissertation, I don't, or my book, I should say here, right? On my book, I don't really construct a positive proposal of like what the human nature of Christ really is. I'm just creating sorts of fences around what can we really say if we go from biblical patterns of talk, and also confessional Chalcedonian and Constantinopolitan kind of talks about the human nature of Christ. And I say, we can say this, but I don't think we can say that he has a fallen human nature. But within the unfallen, there's still plenty of space where you could go.
That's great. And so what would you say, just in brief, what is the central thesis of your book? Not your dissertation, your book.
Yeah. I would say that the central thesis of my book is that to really appropriately talk about the human nature of Christ, you have to have a Trinitarian framework, a good metaphysics of grace, and a good doctrine of original sin. Those things really create that sort of fence for you to talk about the human nature of Christ, right? So if we have what I say in my dissertation, a patristic notion of inseparable operation, together with a post-Reformation doctrine of original sin, and some medieval Thomistic notions of grace, of union and habitual grace, then we can appropriately talk about the human nature of Christ without really falling into the what I call errors or mistakes of the fallen view.
That's great. And so you just mentioned that in your book, you're also retrieving some ancient sources. And I think that this is also especially interesting in terms of, the contribution, especially of this monograph series, which is, studies in historic and systematic theology. So there's an emphasis there on, retrieving maybe certain emphases within the past, within the Christian tradition, that can help speak to contemporary theological issues and debates today. So so you kind of just mentioned them, but who are some of those sources that you're retrieving in order to kind of further the debate? And also maybe too, if you'd like, if you were to give maybe some principles of what maybe faithful retrieval looks like, as opposed to kind of a picking and choosing of certain things that maybe are out of context, and that maybe is not an unfaithful retrieval, but something that is maybe not as faithful to that kind of methodology.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny that in my book I'm dealing with Karl Barth, and mostly on a kind of this negative view, but he's also known as the one responsible for a revival of Trinitarian theology on the 20th century, right? But I think he is a good model in the sense that he's, if you know anything about Bart, is that he's reading the scriptures with its full economical force, right? So he's letting scripture really dictate the way he talks about dogmatics, right? The dogmatic enterprise is not and cannot be anything else than guided by scripture, primarily by scripture. So, but if you read church dogmatics, he's also pulling from the Reformed tradition and the patristic era, and he has this long-winded conversations with Thomas, which he's like not satisfied with the Thomistic metaphysics, but he's pulling those things as he's reading scriptures. So I think your question is good in the sense that what really is a faithful retrieval project is a project that's reading scripture with the other voices. So in a sense, to do retrieval is to inhabit the classroom of the saints and to learn from their instruction. So you're in the classroom, you're learning from, and your questions like who are the people? So I'm learning from Thomas, I'm learning from Gregory of Nyssa, I'm learning from Augustine, and Bavinck, and I'm kind of sitting on this classroom, and they are the teachers, but the textbook still is the Bible, right? So I'm not sitting on the classroom of the saints of the world and just reading Bavinck for Bavinck's sake. I'm reading Bavinck so he can guide me and illumine me to read the Bible more faithfully. And I think that's a good general principle for retrieval. And I think retrieval is a really important task, one that us as evangelicals, I mean, at least talking about me, right? I think you too, as a kind of coming from an evangelical tradition, have done a poor job on kind of reading the tradition well.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that you mentioned Bart. It's interesting when you read the church dogmatics and you see these long excurses and sections where he's talking, engaging with kind of Lutheran Orthodoxy and Reformed Orthodoxy, and like you said, the patristic tradition, and Thomas. And so some people might maybe disagree with some of Bart's readings of some of these people, but at the very least, he's reading them. He's engaging with them. He's using them as dialogue partners, and with an open Bible to try to understand and try to work out some of these issues within Christian theology. And so,
and the classical kind of outworking of retrieval is that retrieval is bringing up resources from the past to help you answer problems and issues from the present. Mm-hmm. So within my book, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, right? So there's this huge debate that's kind of arising mainly in the 19th, 20th century regarding the human nature of Christ. And all I'm doing is just pulling resources from all over the tradition to help answer this debate that is facing me, right? It's facing us as a church today. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think retrieval is important.
That's great. So one other kind of, obviously Bart is in the subtitle. He's a figure who looms large within your book, but someone else who actually is also quite important is T.F. Torrance. So I would love it if you could maybe briefly kind of explain who Torrance was, and specifically maybe why he's important for Karl Barth's reception, especially within the Anglo-speaking tradition, and just in terms of interpreting and understanding Bart. I would love for you to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's another great question. I think there's this sort of myth, I think, going around in the academy, like Bartian academy, that Torrance and Bart are doing or kind of working around the same project. And I think that there are things that are pretty similar, because Torrance, of course, is a student of Bart, but they're doing different things in different places, right? And I try to make this kind of clear on my book, right? So for Torrance, for example, on the fallen nature of Christ, his main preoccupation is rejection of dualism and external salvation. Whereas for Bart, his main reason for the fallen flesh is solidarity and grace, right? Those are kind of the two main things for him. Now, the details of that go if you read the book. So there you go. Marketing for you. Just go buy the book. But yeah, I think so. There are two different people, right, working with two different projects. Similar in some ways. Torrance, for example, buys a lot from Bart on his doctrine of election and his doctrine of, and even his rejection of a little bit of a forensic salvation in a sense, right? Bart does some tricky things here and there with that, as it's the case often. But Torrance is a interpreter of Bart in in Scotland and generally in the English-speaking world. It continues to be very important and very influential. I mean, I'm about to go and talk on the T.F. Torrance Fellowship, on the relationship of Torrance and Webster, on biblical interpretation. So he's continued to be very influential, and especially also, I think one of his other main contributions, since you're asked like who is he, is just like his understanding of theology as a science, his understanding of intuition, and his epistemology for the whole theological enterprise. I think we continue to read him and be there's a lot of good insight. You may not agree with everything he's doing, but he's like buying a lot from Polanyi and kind of a relationship of external, internal ways of knowing things, how intuition relates to that and ways to read the Bible, concept formation, all sorts of things. He continues to be like a gigantic figure in the 20th century, I think. And I don't know if I'm going.
No, this is great. No, this is great. Yeah.
I think one way one of the reasons he was kind of rejected a little bit, mostly in the kind of in America in the 20th century, was first, I think, his association with Bart, which in America, Presbyterian, evangelical world tend to kind of buy from Van Tillian readings of Bart, which is already going to be more negative in a sense, and more kind of prejudgmental in a lot of sense for it too. But also, I think the second reason is just his historiography is a little bit off, and several people have proved that. I think Luis Ayres has shown his readings of patristic era, patristic period is largely kind of mistaken. So that also puts people with the wrong foot on reading him, I guess. But there's still a lot of good things to learn and understand, as it's mostly with our work on Retrieval. I think you wouldn't read Nissa and agree with everything here, right? Yeah. I hope not.
That's right. So,
yeah.
That's great. So just briefly then. So again, if you were to give like a pitch, an elevator pitch for your book and why people should read it, in 30 seconds, let's hear what your pitch is for why people should read your book, Sinless Flesh.
Yeah. So I start the book with this kind of a short reflection on purity, right? And how purity is passé now. And we tend to think of purity and relate it to Puritanism, Puritanesque, and it's just negative. We don't want to have any relationship with this sort of purity. It just tends to be judgmental, not fun. And when applied to Christology, you're just like, yeah, if Christ is to be pure in this sense, I don't want to have anything to do with that. But if you want to learn how purity and sinlessness can be really fun and important, not only for your life, but for the good of the whole world, I think. And if you're interested in academic work, just read my book.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Awesome. Well, I have to say, I'm pretty impressed that we've gone and had a conversation this far and haven't really talked about Aquinas at all. So I think that is really is something that is quite impressive. But the book is Sinless Flesh, a critique of Karl Barth's Fallen Christ from our Studies in Historical and Systematic Theology series. Rafael, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Scott.